Hello, everyone! Welcome back to A Little Help for Our Friends, Season 2. Welcome, newly minted Dr. Kibby McMahon.
Hello.
Dr. McMahon. Hello. Today, we thought we would start out the season with a topic that I'm going to bet the vast majority of our listeners have dealt with, are currently dealing with. It's super common. It is the topic prompt I put out on Instagram that got the most response. It's imposter syndrome. And in academia, Kibby and I know this feeling all too well. And so I think we're going to talk about it in terms of what it is, why it happens, and what is particular to women and minorities in some of these workplaces, and why imposter syndrome might be worse for them. And some tips on how to help your friends through it and how to help yourself through it. So, Kibby, what is imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this because it's imposter syndrome. The term is coming up a lot in, I don't know, the news and blogs and everything like that. It's like a lot of people can resonate with it, but like, what is it exactly? Knowing what actually is the definition. And the best one I read so far is imposter syndrome is a psychological term that refers to patterns of behavior wherein we doubt our abilities and have a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. I kind of like that because I always experience it as insecurity, like, oh, you know, should I talk now? Is it okay? Do I deserve to apply for this job? But it's also this this fear of being exposed as like, I don't deserve this. Someone's going to find me out and realize that I'm not good enough and they're going to fire me. So it's doubting your own abilities and your own merit, but also the constant fear of being found out.
Yeah, I'm glad we defined it because I had a few people reach out and they're like, what? I thought this was when you thought that another person was secretly an imposter.
Oh.
Or that you feel like
a doppelganger? Like
yeah, or like there is that condition where suddenly people you think that they are imposters. So I think that they were getting it confused with that, which would also be a cool episode, but probably affects 0.001% of our listeners. So
it's not the body snatchers. It's feeling like doubting yourself at work or other situations. But
yeah, I have felt this so much, especially when I worked in tech, and this was so exacerbated by. I remember I had a really good interview for this last internship that I had. And I had worked on this project. So I kind of knew how to prepare for the interview and get the job. But then once I was there, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember my boss in a meeting was like, yeah, you had such a great interview. But ever since then. And it's the imposter syndrome that I was feeling was I tricked them into hiring me with this project I brought to my interview. And now they're going to see that I'm a fraud. And that's exactly what happened. So... So I've had imposter syndrome ever since. But generally, imposter syndrome is when you actually do deserve the position that you're in. You're smart, you're capable, you have achieved a lot, but for whatever reason, you're just telling yourself that you're not as smart or as capable as everybody else there. Your achievements, maybe you're thinking like, okay, I know I have a first author publication, but other people helped me with it, and I couldn't have done it without them. And other people who have first author publications, I'm sure it was easy for them. I made this website, but I got all this help from other people and mentorship. And, there's so many ways where we can denigrate our own achievements and make it feel like they don't really matter. And they were just used to trick people into hiring you or accepting you.
Yeah, this is so interesting for me because I didn't realize how much imposter syndrome was driving so much of my motivations and the way I saw myself professionally. Yeah. And only recently, now finally getting the PhD and everything, I realized how much that was like the fire under my butt. And in ways that were sometimes helpful and sometimes not helpful. I didn't realize how much. I mean, we're talking about academia, and I know imposter syndrome affects people in all different kinds of professions that are competitive, like medicine, law, anything else that it's really, really hard to get into. And with academia, I I felt constantly like I need to be better and I need to have more skills and then I'll deserve it. Right. So at least I had like a little bit of efficacy and like hope and optimism that, okay, I feel like an imposter now. I don't feel good enough. But if I work really, really, really hard and really learn how to do statistics, really learn how to do research or whatever, then I will deserve it. And that's one of the factors why I spent 6 years between undergrad and grad school, trying to build up my CV, trying to build up my skills in order to feel like, okay, I'm ready and I'm a worthy candidate. But I just realized that beast was never fed. Like I constantly felt not good enough. And that drove me to work really hard. So I am happy about that. But on the other hand, there were times that I really shortchanged myself. Yeah. And I feel kind of sad about that.
I know you have felt as though being a woman in academia has really influenced your experience with imposter syndrome. And not just, I know there's the part about, being less represented in academia, but then there's also the part of how we've been socialized. Can you talk about how that experience has been?
Yeah, it's one of the experiences that it's only really come to fruition or like cause more of a problem as I've gotten older and gotten like farther in my career. And seeing the gender bias in academia made me realize that I have imposter syndrome, right? So it did clarify this syndrome for me where, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I've had a lot of privilege. I've gone to really great schools. I've had a lot of teachers and my family members encourage my professional endeavors. Like no one has ever pointed to me and said, you don't deserve this outright. But kind of like a lot of these different kind of social biases, it's insidious because it's really subtle. Where, for example, like in our program, I could get the same accomplishments, amount of papers, amount of grants, whatever, awards, whatever things that we have. And so my male counterparts and my male colleagues will get announcements and congratulations and recognition, and I won't. And I started noticing that a little bit. I was like, oh, that's weird. And it didn't bother me as much, but over time, what I saw was this ease and lack of imposter syndrome in, let's say, my male peers, where they go, after this, I'll just go get a professorship. Like, I'll get a grant, and then I'll be a professor, and, then I'll see where I want to be a professor. Whereas I'm constantly like, I'm not good enough to be a professor. I need to get so much more on my CV in order to feel like I deserve it or to be ready to apply. And to see their lack of anxiety about it, I saw like, whoa, why are we so different? Oh, wait, I'm living with an imposter syndrome that they don't have. They feel like they deserve it. They don't doubt their abilities. They don't feel like they're going to be exposed as a fraud because they might have had subtle messaging where they were told that they have a place in this world and I need to fight for it in order to get it.
It's interesting talking about gender bias for me because I'm so resistant to the idea of sexism in a lot of contexts. But it's hard to parse out because it's sort of cyclical or it feeds off of itself. Like, I do agree that I think women are socialized to express confidence in less confident ways, to be more modest, to be more self-deprecating. And that when women make statements that are as confident as the statements men can make, it's seen as aggressive or tone deaf, or just unfeminine somehow. And that's naturally going to make us either doubt our abilities or not shine as much as men, because we're, people like confidence. They like knowing that they're hiring somebody who at least pretends to know what they're talking about. And it's hard to know then. I mean, it just seems like that creates such a beast of, okay, well, then men get hired, women don't, and then women feel like they're imposters because they're not really well represented. And I'm so used, I think, to, I think most of my imposter, or much of my imposter syndrome comes from ADHD, feeling like I constantly let other people down and that I can make my CV look shiny, but then as soon as I arrive, then they're gonna find out that I'm a total disaster. So to me, it doesn't feel gendered. It feels like ADHD. But that doesn't mean that that's the full story.
Yeah, I think there's this one article that it came out in 2019 in JAMA Network. It's called Imposter Syndrome, Treat the Cause, Not the Symptom. We'll put it on the website. But, I mean, it kind of speaks to what we're talking about, which is like, first of all, you're attributing to yourself and your deficiencies, right? It's like, there's something about me that makes me not good enough for all the things that look like it's like something that can easily be attained by someone else, right? Like if I don't have ADHD, for me it was like I want to have a family but also be an academic. And then I was like, oh no, I'm gonna be nursing. I'm gonna be sleep deprived, and if I can't put the pedal to the metal and publish all the time, that will expose me as someone who's not a true academic, will expose me as someone who is going to dedicate my time and energy to something else. And I was like, wait a minute, dudes don't know how to deal with that. But so we attribute it to ourselves, right? It's not like a systemic problem in our minds. It's like we don't have what it takes, and I trick myself into thinking like not trick myself. I did this where it's like, okay, I'm going to try to compensate for all of my individual failings and put off making a family or overcome like my ADD type of mind and really, really work hard to overcome. And so I look like I deserve it. But then there comes a point, at least for me, maybe it'll come for you at some point, where it's like, wait, do I have to feel so bad about myself in order to feel like I could just get a job?
Yeah. I mean, I think a thing that majorly contributed to my imposter syndrome is extremely gendered, which is that I had male bosses for most of my, and I'm talking about when I was in tech, not so much in psychology, but I had male bosses in tech, and they helped me a lot because they were attracted to me, and my narcissist ex was a boss of mine, and so my CV got better and better, but it was because I was coddled at work, like then would compliment me, tell me how smart I was, and I never knew, is this real? I mean, even a writing professor I had who I think he genuinely really liked my writing, but there was definitely this sense of, I don't know if he's complimenting it because it's that good or if it's because he likes me. And that definitely became a way that I would overcompensate, like using charm and some people flirtation to be like, well, this will keep me safe even if I'm a disaster. Like, it'll make up for my deficiencies if they just like having me around or even just like looking at me.
Yeah. I mean, even inherent to what you're saying is this concept in psychology called locus of control, which is like, it's a phenomenon to describe how do you understand where your achievements are coming from? Is it something in you that you're doing, or is it something external? And even the way you're talking about it, like, I would get a good CV because someone likes me, whether it's they like my writing or my looks or whatever. It's this idea that I can only get success from an external locus, right? Something outside of me versus an internal locus, which is like, it's because I'm great at my job. And a lot of imposter syndrome is driven by this external locus of control where, for example, if I'm writing a grant, I have to write it in a way that I don't have to, but I found most success with saying, I'm going to be successful in this study because I have an amazing mentorship team, Dr. So-and-so, so-and-so, and I'm at Duke University with all its resources. I'm so lucky to have the opportunity to receive these benefits from white men. But versus like I've seen some grants written by my male counterparts that are just like, I am this. I have achieved this, therefore I will be successful. It's like, wait a minute. So it's just like this inherent idea that we have to draw the achievement from something outside of ourselves and then we can get it, versus like we're just born with the right to be here.
Yeah, that would be really, really cool research to see if women get grants using that team-based language and men get grants using an internal locus of control. I did it. This is me. It'd be really cool to see that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I think to some extent, I don't think we're ever going to fully like eradicate these differences. And that, I guess, I don't know what I feel. That can be okay. But it just does seem like we're creating a bit of a beast where there's so much burden on women to do so much and overcompensate. And I mean, I like that you bring up babies, because I always talk about egg freezing. Like, again, like Paul, my boyfriend, is 39 and doesn't have a kid yet, but he has gotten nearly to tenure without ever having to worry about a baby. And we don't have that luxury because we kind of can wait that long if we freeze our eggs. So, you know, refer back to that episode. But, that's just a thing. Like, women have so much to overcompensate for. If they have babies at home, if they want to have babies in the next 5 years, it's like you got to like explode your CV now with publications. And yet we are, I guess, socialized not to experience the pride or attach our names to it as an achievement that came from us solo. And that seems exhausting. And something that women might not actually want to keep participating in forever.
Yeah, I think this imposter syndrome is coming from being in a profession or situation context that has like only one model of success, right? Like, in order to be successful by the age of 40, you're the most productive and dedicate all your time and energy to this job.
Yeah.
Whereas that is just not something available to any to a lot of women who want to have a family around that time, right? So even without even realizing it, we probably internalize it to the point where it's like, okay, we have to fit ourselves into a mold that it actually we're not a fit for. So of course we feel like we'll be, you know, I felt, you know, this description of fear of being exposed. I was actually really afraid of being exposed for my desire to have a family.
That's fucked up.
Like, I was like, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to, in all my interviews and in professional settings, I would never say like, yeah, one of my major, when people ask, what do you want to do in 5 years? I would never say, I want to, you know, build a lab, have a, you know, make cool projects, work with people, and also have a baby. Like, that's something that I hid because I would be exposed for being a fraud, right? For being someone who presents myself as someone 100% dedicated to work when I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fucked up that we have to feel like having a baby is baggage.
Yeah.
For getting a job. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And if we were in if academia or any of these professions made room for that, right? Like, okay, great. We have a great maternity leave and program. We have caretaking stuff. We love families. I wouldn't feel like I'm a fraud.
Yeah. I know. I remember my dad was chair of the econ department at WVU, and he has memories of like hiring female candidates, and then there's this thing that happens where if you're married, like they'll find a position for your husband too. He's like women were complete rock stars, but it was their, and we would kind of be like, oh, fine, we'll take this kind of loser husband or whatever. But it was the husband that wound up achieving more, because then the wife would get pregnant, and there's no, like, even with maternity leave, we're not going to be publishing during those times.
Yeah.
Probably. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're just, it is built in. But anyway, that's just a depressing tangent we don't have to go down.
But I mean, this our experience is very much, we're talking about the gender bias, but there's also a lot of racial bias too. I mean, I was actually told when I was a kid, I was told by another parent that I'm only in the school because I am Asian and the affirmative action. Like, if someone told my mom that, So
What the
I know that, yeah, right. So stuff like that kind of enters your brain. And I know that you have a really interesting follower who gave you a story of something similar.
I do, yeah. So this is an acquaintance of mine, and he answered the imposter syndrome prompt I put out on Instagram, and he said he's a Black Ivy League graduate. He felt that way throughout college. And then we come back to this in a second. But then as a former heroin dealer, as a teenager that now works in community development for youth in poor areas, I feel like I don't deserve to have the opportunity to try to help communities that I once helped break. He says he manages it well now, but it definitely creeps in from time to time. So this is somebody whose mother was murdered when he was 4, who was shot twice before going to college, and was a heroin dealer as a teenager. Also somebody who got, back in the old SAT when it was out of 1600, got a 1520 on his SAT and was a published essayist by 8th grade. So extremely accomplished, has these two realities, I guess. He's this academic superstar, but is dealing just with so much tragedy at the same time. And so he said, I started to feel like an outsider that infiltrated. I was a street kid who'd been shot twice before I got accepted there. There was no one like me in my college circle or experience, so I kept to myself a lot because I figured no one would understand me anyway because I'm not supposed to be there. I asked what he does to manage it. He said I try to slow things down and not look at the entire picture at once. I lean into being my full self and stopped being concerned about being palatable to others. This is who I am, and I've survived a lot, so I've earned what I've gotten. I stopped being shy about taking pride in making it out of my circumstances. In college, it was a little different. I tried to out-achieve everyone. The institution became my adversary. I knew that the people that created this university never anticipated someone like me being there, so I promised myself I'd be successful and shove it in their faces. So it's interesting because he has these two kind of forms of imposter syndrome. One was when he left his community and was suddenly in this place that just wasn't built for people like him. And he's surrounded by rich kids, named Trad and I don't know, ridiculous.
Trad.
Trad.
Oh, Trad. You're so privileged.
And yeah, I mean, I can't, if I met him in college, I'd be like, holy shit, your experience is so different than what mine was. And that has gotta make him feel like a total outsider or almost like a fascinoma to other people. Like, wow, you're so interesting. Tell me more. But there's a lack of genuine connection there. He feels this need to overcompensate. And this just sense of not belonging, wasn't able, it sounds like, to fully kind of embrace his social experience there, keeping to himself a lot, keeping his head down, just trying to outcompete. And now he feels imposter syndrome when he goes back to the place he came from, because he feels like he doesn't deserve to come in now as the savior or this helper when he was once, part of the problem that he's now trying to solve.
It's interesting. It's kind of highlighting the lack of feeling of belonging with imposter syndrome, like not feeling like you really should be there, deserve to be there, or people will accept you, right? So it's kind of like feeling rejected already or anticipating rejection.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting story. It's also interesting to think about the people who feel a lot of imposter syndrome will tend to overcompensate and work hard and look even more deserving, right? They might achieve a lot. They might be regarded as special or something like that, but they're constantly feeling like they don't deserve even that. And it probably drives a lot of good work, right? A lot of productivity, but from this feeling of anxiety.
Yeah, it's amazing because he clearly deserved to be there more than Trad. I mean, Trad's parents, Byron and Muffy, paid for him to have the best schooling throughout his whole life.
He definitely played lacrosse. Trad is a lacrosse player.
He's a lacrosse player. He is with his BFF Putnam, they would I borrowed it, sorry. Trad and Putnam would just like go out.
We apologize in
lacrosse.
advance for anyone who plays lacrosse or named Trad or Putnam or Byron or Muffy. We love you all, but just this particular Trad is a jerk.
Yeah. Well, maybe not even. Maybe he's a nice lacrosse player. He just had all the time to study, 2-parent household, food on the table, money in his pockets, versus this person who grew up with one parent, obviously was trying to fend for himself and build up his own wealth. And, he said he took the SAT after spending half the year in the hospital. So, it's not like, I don't know. It's not like he just squeaked in either. Like, this guy is clearly incredibly accomplished and goes there and accomplished all of this, even given his circumstances, and still feels like he needs to prove his worth. And I guess it's just the experience of being not like the others.
Yeah, and when you get that message of not being like the others, I think it's interesting to think about how we act on imposter syndrome, how that shapes the way we behave in those social settings. Mm-hmm. That's probably adaptive and fits what you need to do to stay not exposed and accepted, right? Which is to be act really humble, right? Mm-hmm. As like these different kind of groups, like women or minorities or people from different backgrounds who are in this situation. They can't act like trad. They can't act like taking it for granted.
He actually said that he overcompensated with bravado, which I could see too. I would think that's maybe more of a male.
Yeah, but you definitely have to act on it in maybe in a very specific way, right? You can't just like be yourself and be authentic and not think about it. You have to put on a front or some way to either make people like you or not really, quote, like find out, how deficient you actually are. Like, I know for some people may come in with bravado and some people like me come in with a lot of almost kind of like anxious humility of or modesty of no, oh, thank you, but no, it's really because I had this opportunity. It's not me. I don't know. Like this, for me, kind of toning down my accomplishments and being like overly obsequious or things like that.
Or people like me who do that when it comes to work, but then blast the bravado when it comes to like, but I'm so awesome, that's why I'm here, right? Because you like me, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm interesting, even if I can't do anything right.
Yeah, this kind of gets into what can loved ones do to help someone with imposter syndrome. And I think the thing not to do if you're a friend or loved one of someone who experiences this is just to dismiss it or say, like, you're being crazy. Of course you're great. Of course you deserve this. Or you're just insecure, right? Like attributing it to the individual and dismissing it is really not helpful. Every time I've gotten that response of just like, okay, you don't get it. You don't get me. You don't get what my world is here and how hard it is. Like, why don't you just apply for all those hard jobs? I'm like, well, yeah, but it's taken me a lot of internal work to kind of get there. So you're missing the gap. You're missing why I'm so nervous about this.
Yeah, I guess, it's a struggle for me watching you go through this because I know how accomplished you are and how capable you are. And when you say things like, I can't compete in academia because the jobs are going to go to men or men are going to outcompete me, I'm like, just try though, because I know that you are worthy. And I know that for you, it's like you have to overcome this huge barrier of fear and invalidation. And having watched this happen before, like, it's not like it's in your mind. But it's, I guess, a struggle watching you back down from the opportunities too, or back down from describing yourself confidently.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, and it does actually help, speaking of the loved one, it does help to hear something like that. I'm like, getting a little reassurance, it is nice. but it's still in my mind, like, you're not seeing the amount of work, the uphill battle I'm going to have to go to fight against in order to get there. Like, for me to have to think, okay, I probably deserve to apply for this kind of job. Maybe I can do it. I do have a good enough CV. I can dedicate myself. It will take like an extra amount of struggle and overcoming my internal blockages that I might not feel like I'm up for, right? I might feel tired. I might feel, I'm not up for the struggle. So when people say, oh, it should be fine, like, they're not getting how hard it was gonna. It's kind of like saying to someone who's depressed, like, just get up and exercise. It'll make you feel better. It's like, yes, of course. But getting myself to that point is so much more agonizing than you probably think.
Yeah. Well, I also get that at a certain point, your life doesn't have to be about struggle. And you can make the decision, I just want to go into a workplace that feels healthier to me. Or be in a dynamic that feels like I can have a kid and not feel like I'm letting down my employer for my choice to have a family. It's just, yeah. So I guess there's this balance of validating, but I don't know. It's really hard. It's really hard to just be like, okay, then don't try, unless it's. I know, like, unless it's dealing with the entire system of, like, if I go into investment banking, it's going to be a man's world, and there's going to be no support for a family life. I would say the same thing about academia. And it's like, I just don't want to deal with that for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. I think that's fair.
Yeah. And even just being open to talking about that there is that struggle and I do have a choice. Like, it kind of puts the locus of control back onto me. But other things that loved ones can do are just pointing out something that's been helpful for me is people who point out objectively the standards and how I have met him. Mm-hmm. That it's kind of presenting counter evidence to my belief that I'm not good enough. It's like, no, actually, you've achieved this and this and this, and those are the kind of achievements that are the necessary qualifications for applying for this kind of job, right? Yeah. Like, you need X amount of publications, you need to have had this many years of experience in order to apply for that, and you have met those, so you deserve it. Yeah. Understanding that there's a mechanism in your head going, I don't deserve it. But even just like laying out those objective standards, being really clear about that to your loved one with imposter syndrome, but also validating why they have imposter syndrome. I think even just, I've gotten a lot of like, oh, you're just being too insecure or too doubtful of yourself, right? Like blaming it on me and my, like, another deficiency on top of my deficiencies. Mm-hmm. But like when people say, yeah, it's because it's really hard to find women academia with, families and being able to balance all of it in a healthy, happy way. That is contributing to why you feel like an imposter, because there's not that many models that you're looking for. So yeah, it's just like really understanding the social implication in this like very individual feeling.
Yeah, I think there's well, I guess before I get into parents, I mean, one thing that has helped me immensely, and I know this is something that's talked about all the time, is just talking to other people about it and noticing that actually they often struggle too. Mm-hmm. Everybody's wearing these masks of confidence. And like, I would say my imposter syndrome was much worse in tech than it is in psych, mostly because I kind of was an imposter in tech. Like, I wasn't good at it and I didn't like it, and there was no reason for me really to be there. But in psych, it certainly comes out in research. But I think what's been helpful is like, when you go into academia, you have a cohort. For me, it's 5 people, and we're fairly tight, and everybody talks about their insecurities, and everybody talks about how there's another girl with ADHD in my program, and it's just like really helpful to see her doing the exact same things as me and struggling the same way as me, but still knowing she's smart, she's capable, she's here for a reason. And so I think just like being open about it, like literally there were messages pouring in about imposter syndrome. I know that so many people struggle with this, mm-hmm. and talking about it is helpful.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like hearing yeah, it's kind of like peeling back the mask and saying we all kind of feel this.
Yeah.
I remember when I was before grad school and I was working really hard to try to apply and always feeling like I'm not good enough. And I remember going to a meditation retreat that had like kind of psychological science bent to it. Like it was like part scientific talks about mindfulness and meditation. And I ended up sitting next to a really famous professor in mindfulness and clinical psychology. She was such a lovely person. And we did a meditation about, you know, what's going on inside. And then we just turned to the person next to us and shared. And she turned to me and said, like, I constantly just feel like I'm not good enough.
No.
And I remember, I mean, it was so amazing to hear. I mean, sad, but so amazing to hear that someone who was like my hero also felt that imposter syndrome. And this was the woman who was giving the keynote speech later on that day. So it's just like, oh, wow. It took it away from me. It allowed me to feel like, okay, maybe this is something that is part of this field or this system or this group of people. And it's not just me being deficient. This is something bigger than me. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, I know one thing I struggle with is because I feel so defective in in work situations. I mean, I think I truly have like kind of a severe case going of
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, and just like just terrible self-esteem when it comes to work. Again, not clinically though, and that's been such a relief. It can feel stupid when other people have imposter syndrome. I'm like, no. If I'm getting through this, okay, you're great. Like, you are just amazing. Why would you even waste time or energy on thinking that you don't have what it takes when it's so clear that you do? So,
yeah, well, maybe that's something to move away from in terms of us always comparing ourselves to each other and like who deserves to have the imposter syndrome versus not, right? It's because like maybe this is just something that is beyond like actually how, you know, how capable we are or something, but maybe it's part that and part there's just the messages of like, do you deserve to be here? As like who you are just naturally with ADD, you know, whatever gender, whatever sexuality and ethnic background, like do you have a place here? And just being yourself, like without having to hide something about yourself. So yeah, with the loved ones, I would say that like even just keeping all these things in mind and not just going the game of like, oh, you're great, you're even better than me. So like that's very dismissive in some ways to kind of dismiss whether you have imposter syndrome or not, but just understand that it's a syndrome beyond maybe like what
makes
is
sense.
Reality. Yeah, whatever makes sense.
Yeah. I was just gonna say there's an again like kind of a cyclical thing that happens with imposter syndrome where like in order to try to reduce our anxiety about it, we make ourselves look perfect, but then that perfect veneer isn't real, and so that then reinforces the feeling of being fraudulent. So like I noticed that with the interview, like when you go on an interview, you typically try to bring your very, very best and downplay your flaws. And then naturally then on your first day of work, when you show up as a flawed human being, it's like, oh God, how do I ever live up to this version of myself? And so maybe trying to bring down that wall quickly rather than trying to maintain it all the time could be helpful. Like,
yeah, I think eventually something, I don't know about loved ones could do, but people around can really show different models of success, right, in the workplace, or, you know, either just having these, you know, mothers or, you know, other kind of people that you wouldn't expect in these positions of power, in these roles, to be their authentic self, right? Flaws and all.
Yeah. And
to show that you don't have to be perfect in order to be successful or accepted here. You know, that's one thing that over time could be the part of the solution of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance you have to strike, though, because I know one thing I do to reduce my own anxiety is present myself insecurely, warning people that I'll disappoint them, etc., so that then they won't be surprised. And that's not great either. So I guess a way of being a confidently authentic, confidently flawed person, there's some sweet spot there. If anybody can figure it out. My Instagram.
I've heard many brilliant academic women say, it's really hard for me to go and present at conferences when I have a baby at home and I'm currently nursing. So, like, what are we going to do about this, right? Like, not being, overly humble or being self-deprecating or anything, but just saying, like, here, these are the things that make me feel not welcome here. Yeah. And either you don't have me here and I'm a confident lady who could get other jobs, or fix it. Do something about this. Yeah. Make me feel more welcome.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing I would say about helping loved ones with imposter syndrome is if you're a parent, one thing we often do, and this was definitely done in my household, was point out characteristics instead of values. So, like, you're so smart, you got this A, like, God, you're brilliant, you're so smart. And then that sets up this kind of impossible standard of like, okay, if I'm smart, then I get A's. Or if I get A's, it means I'm smart. Instead of, you can be smart and still get a D. What that maybe means is that either you struggle in this one area, or you didn't work very hard, or something else is going on. So instead, praising effort, praising kind of the value around like what you're proud of.
Yeah, and work ethic and process versus like, like traits that you're inherent traits. Yeah. So yeah, I know that's gotten more popular in education and parenting styles in general. Like, instead of, you're a pretty girl, but like, oh wow, you're expressing yourself in cool ways with that shirt. I don't know, like, or instead of like, you're so brilliant and smart, but like, oh, you've worked really hard. So yeah, just emphasizing the process instead of just what you are and whether you deserve what you're getting.
Right.
Not.
Okay, so to sum up, tips. I'm not even going to say the V word. Okay, well, validate. Don't assume the other person is stupid for having imposter syndrome just because you feel worse.
Jacqueline, that applies to you. We could both have imposter syndrome. Share in the misery.
Share in the misery. It's not a zero-sum game. You're welcome to a slice of the pie. Yeah, I mean, understand that they're not crazy for having noticed processes or attributes of their work environment that have made them feel worse or undervalued or like they can't succeed. Point out their real accomplishments and try to remind them objectively, like, that they have every right to be there. And I would say also maybe bring down this unrealistic expectation that the person over there with their CV was just because, like, that Trad's CV is amazing because he's somebody other than you. Like, looking at your own CV and saying, well, I had help, or, well, I got lucky here, I tricked somebody here. Like, all of our accomplishments are complicated, and many of us received help. And just because those things make you insecure, like, it doesn't mean that that wasn't the same case for another person. Like, it doesn't mean that their CV was them just getting first place and everything and doing everything on their own. That could have been more articulate. I'm sorry. And
no, I mean, it kind of speaks to the concept that locus and control we were talking about, which is, instead of saying, oh, that other person, that person's is achieving because of who they are, and I'm only achieving because of the things that other people are giving me, but just recognizing that it's not that simple. We all have qualities internally, but also gotten support from the external world to get to where we are. So
yeah. Okay, I think that's about it.
Yeah, I will I'll link the Imposter Syndrome Treat the Cause Not the Symptom article on our website. And also, I know that there are some other websites with nice tips. So we'll put that on our website as well, on littlehelpforourfriends.com. Check us out.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for returning for season 2. We hope you will stick with us through this season and beyond. And we love you all. And we'll see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.